Hello and welcome. You have tuned into Broadland Youth Advisory Board's first ever podcast. Youth Advisory Board is YAB for short. I hope you find this conversation educating and informative. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Broadland YAB and you're joining us for the talk about tackling discrimination in school, a conversation addressing the importance of not ignoring discriminatory language and why talking about it can be better than telling someone off. So we're going to start with some introductions first. I'm Emily. I'm a young commissioner from Broadland YAB. Izzy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Izzy. I'm a young commissioner and chair on Broadland YAB.
Hi, I'm Declan. I'm also a young commissioner on Broadland YAB.
And hi, I'm Sophie. I'm young commissioner and chair on Broadland YAB.
We're going to start off by just describing what the YAB is, just in case you guys don't know. So there are 7 YABs in Norfolk, and we're a group of young people working with adults to make change. Our first topic is why we want to challenge discrimination and discriminatory language in schools, and then we'll move on to how to challenge it and give you some top tips on how to challenge it.
I think I'd like to kick it off by saying that it's really important to be aware that you don't know who's listening when people are just like saying slurs. So like often for me as an LGBT young person, if I hear someone go, oh, that's so gay, and no one picks up on it, it's kind of like, oh, this doesn't matter to us and other people as much as it matters to me, and they haven't realised it could have hurt me, and it kind of feels a bit isolating.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult hearing something that you identify as being used in a negative way, and I think people don't recognise how hard that hits, especially I think when you're a bit younger and kind of exploring that side, like exploring your sexuality and things. Hearing that being used as such a negative way is so damaging.
I think once you hear it in a negative tone, you immediately depict yourself as something negative. You're not going to be happy with who you are if people use it negatively and as something that can be used against you, and that can be really damaging to somebody's mental health.
Yeah, and I think it can make it harder accepting that, because you're not only accepting your sexuality, you're accepting something that you've heard being negative. Yeah, and I think that's really difficult sometimes. For loads of different slurs, it's a similar feeling of kind of isolation.
And I think if people don't understand what they're using, then in a way they shouldn't use it, because you're just trying to fit in with the crowd, and that can be really difficult because you're trying to fit in with your friends and trying to make new friends as you move into high school, start a new school with a whole load of different people.
Yeah, and I think it gets that a little bit harder to kind of stop once you get to the point where a big group of people are using it.
Like often you'll find there's a whole group of people in a certain year group who will use the same slur because it goes around as something that's cool to say and they want to fit in, and it's kind of human nature to want to fit in, but no one really realizes what they're saying or why it can hurt people.
It's just the social norm, which makes it really difficult to challenge at times.
But then I think that's why it's so important that it is challenged, because actually as soon as you challenge it in one classroom, say in front of a group of people, that gets a conversation going, and that starts people kind of thinking about what they're saying almost. But I think it's always such a difficult conversation, especially when when something is such a popular term to use. It's always going to be difficult from both, I think, a teacher and kind of a pupil or a young person point of view.
Like for me, teachers can always be such incredible allies, and especially because it's kind of a position which gives like people respect you inherently, and so it coming from a teacher can often go better than coming from like the person sitting next to you, just because there's always that level of like respect. And I think that's why it can be like so important that teachers pick up on these kinds of things, because then it gets stamped out, and the person in the class who it's not aimed at but it does affect will kind of know that someone heard it and is taking it seriously and they're not alone.
Yeah, And I guess it can help stop that sense of isolation if someone, if a teacher that you really respect is actively trying to stop people saying something that harms you, even without them realizing that it directly affects you.
Also, if a teacher says it, it helps to break the social norm that people start having, because the longer it takes a teacher to start challenging it, the more natural it gets for people to say them. And if it goes on for too long, it will be harder for them to stop them.
It's also hard in some aspects for people to know how to challenge it and to try and budge against the norm, because a lot of people do just want to fit in. That is their goal. They just want to get through high school and fit in. And it's really difficult. Once that does become the social norm, nobody wants to budge against it.
Yeah, and I think especially with younger year groups, there's such a fine line to tread, because a lot of them genuinely don't know what they're saying. I know it sounds kind of weird, but they kind of hear people say things and they want to fit in with that crowd, or they want to be cool, or they want to keep up with what's going on. And so they repeat it and don't stop to consider what it actually means. And it does happen a lot more than you would expect it to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there. You're in year 7 and you start hearing all these new words because you're not in primary school anymore. And, you're 11, you don't question it. You just start using the same words everyone else is using because you want to be grown up. That's kind of what going to high school is in many ways. That's not just slurs, that's, swear words and things as well. But still, it's the same principle. You want to, fit in and you want to grow up, but yeah.
Challenging it can be really difficult. And that brings that on to our next topic of how to challenge discrimination and what teachers can do to challenge it. How to challenge it comes down to how we can deal with it effectively and how we can understand the importance of the impact that it has on some people, and sort of moving and pushing against the crowd to make that change, to make people feel included and accepted for who they are and not isolated.
Yeah, and I think challenging it, I think from what I've seen, I can think of one teacher in particular that did this, and I think educating someone on that is the best way of tackling it, because I remember she just said this, saying this word hurts this group of people. Your friend isn't affected. There's so many other words that you can use if you want to joke around with your friends, but saying that word doesn't just affect that person, it affects a whole group of people that you don't even see. And I think once you say that to someone, I think it becomes more than a word almost.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of like use your best judgment with individual students to see what would work, because it's probably going to be reasonably easy to gauge whether they actually know what they're saying or not. I remember I had a teacher before who, because she was a lesbian, so whenever someone used to say, "Oh, that's so gay," she used to turn around really angrily and go, "No, I'm so gay." And it's kind of corny, but it really humanizes it for people, that like, oh, this is an actual identity that people take pride in, and I shouldn't be using it like that. And so in the right context, that can work really well.
And I think once you've got one teacher that's pushing against the norm and saying that's not banter, that's really hurtful, that pushes everybody else. And just sort of, even if you're just picking up a student in the corridor and going, you really shouldn't be saying that, this affects this group of people and this is the history behind it. But once one person stops saying it, they then push their friends to stop saying it, and that pushes back, and the majority then comes the minority of people saying it. And it's never going to completely go away, but it reduces the impact that it has.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, like if you're a teacher listening to this, just know that like the students in your classes who like are from a minority group or are LGBT or whatever, who hear you pick up on these things, we really notice it, and we really appreciate like the time you take to stop and think and like say something about it. Like all of us have been able to pull up specific examples because it does stick that someone cared enough to challenge it.
I think it really shows that it does matter. Like, you know, if it goes unnoticed for however long, and then it kind of gauge the feeling that actually, you know, challenging this isn't something that's important almost, if that, you know, happens.
And I think once it is challenged by one teacher, I know from personal experience that dislike for yourself starts to go away once you feel accepted by one person, and you feel like they're there for you, or they know that it hurts and they want to do something about it. You feel a lot better about yourself. You don't feel as isolated. You don't feel like you're the only one going through this.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that, the kind of feeling that, oh, this matters to someone other than me, I think can be really like powerful.
Yeah, because I think we've probably all sat in a classroom and wanted to say something but haven't, because if the teacher isn't saying anything, why would I, almost?
But I think if you're a student listening to this, it's really important just to say something, or even if you don't directly address the person who said that slur or said something hurtful to that group, if it was directed at one person, just check in that they're okay.
Okay, so I think some of the things we ultimately want you to take away from this is the fact that picking up on it really matters. So the people that are affected by the slurs that other people use, really remember that you stood up for them. Even if it's just an offhand comment, it still sticks. Don't assume that people mean to hurt by saying these words. Often it's just things that people pick up and don't realise the true meaning behind them, and they probably don't realise the effect that saying them will have on other people. And education, rather than just straight up telling people off, is the most powerful, as it gives them the link between the word they're using and the group of people that it affects, and it makes it real, the impact that word has. And educating people ultimately gives them the responsibility to stop discriminating and stop using that word.
Thank you for listening. We hope you found this informative. This was recorded as part of NYAB, Norfolk Youth Against Bullying Annual Conference.